Alright everyone, we're live. So welcome to the research discussion again, and today is the part 2 of the series of debunking what Supermemo has to say about polyphasic sleeping. And today we are going to start with the refutation on its central argument that the author of the Supermemo blog has been talking about. Previously, the first video that we talked about Supermemo, we try to conclude how free-running sleep isn't a good sleep model to be advertised and practiced by normal people, because it is a non-24-hour circadian rhythm disorder, namely called free-running disorder or free-running type. So the reason why it doesn't really work is that it sounds easy on paper, but in fact you are just suffering from the delayed sleep phase syndrome. So you just technically sleep later and later each day, and it is very inconvenient and hard to schedule around, because you have to think of different events in your life, for example work, schedule, appointments, etc., just to fit in your sleep schedule, as it's changing constantly. And there is also a link between free-running sleep and depression, which I also link in the reference section, and I will show you about that later on. But that was the first time that we did a video about Supermemo and how it was wrong about advertising free-running sleep as the best and healthy sleep schedule for adults to follow, and not polyphasic sleeping. And so today we'll take an extra step just to make sure that we are on the same page again, and that Supermemo will finally acknowledge how it doesn't really fully understand about sleep, and that its evidence is not as strong as people make it out to be. So without further ado, I will start with the challenge and the central argument that Supermemo posed for readers. So the site was written in 2005 for the first time about polyphasic sleeping to show why it didn't and will never work. And in 2010, the author, namely Dr. Piotr Wozniak, a sleep researcher, revisited the mini project that he took on as studying about polyphasic sleeping, and this is what he wrote in the challenge kind of tone. He said, "With all the email criticizing my polyphasic sleep article, not a single one came against the basic scientific premise, which was supposed to make the core of my argument." So the central argument in verbatim of Supermemo, if you actually just Google Supermemo polyphasic sleep, and you should be able to see the same thing here. So I'm just gonna read out loud the whole thing so that we are able to establish what is being placed forward. So it says, human sleep patterns reflect the underlying circadian rhythm, whose period is roughly equal to 24 hours. This circadian cycle calls for a major sleep block every 24 hours. The body clock can be entrained with phase shifts of up to 3 hours. However, the circadian lows cannot be partitioned. The timing of the main low cannot be positioned in any other way than by a phase shift. Periodicity cannot be eliminated without a detriment to health. Circadian components underlie the structure of sleep that is essential for its function. Therefore, in individuals with healthy regulatory sleep system, no sleep schedule can skip the main period of the consolidated subjective night sleep. And so it concludes that polyphasic sleeping does not and will never work. So I can see the implication as to why. So if you look at the two schedules prominent at the time, namely Everyman 3 and Uberman, you can see that both schedules are extremely difficult to have a successful adaptation, with Everyman 3 having only 4 hours sleep total and Uberman only 2 hours. So both of these schedules don't really cover the entirety of the night like what you would expect on monophasic sleep schedule, and so it doesn't really respect the rules of circadian rhythm, and so it can't be healthy. So that's basically the premise. Okay, so the next slide, just to make sure that we understand what is being talked about. So I will provide a quick breakdown of the argument, as well as providing you some of the definitions that I looked up, and help you understand the matter better. So the first definition is the circadian highs. To be able to determine what the lows and the highs mean, I looked it up, and it says that the circadian high hours are from 1 to 3 p.m. in the day, and the circadian low hours are 2 to 4 a.m. Approximately. There is also a research article, not research, but a very commonly viewed site about health that makes a distinction between the two. So it's in the reference section. I'll be able to walk you through that later on when we get there. So basically, what it means is that circadian low hours are the hours that we would want to rest, because it's easy to rest during these hours, like 2 to 4 a.m. And circadian highs are usually when we are active, but still, that doesn't mean that we can't really sleep or have a nap during this time, because 1 to 3 p.m. is also very common for a nap. The next definition is the consolidated subjective night sleep. So by definition, this just means that a continuous chunk of core sleep, in this case monophasic sleeping, that covers the nightly hours from midnight to 8 a.m. as graveyard hours. So this one isn't that hard to understand. Excuse me. The next definition that I'm going to talk about is partition. Partition here, which is to differentiate from repartitioning, which is another concept in polyphasic sleeping that I'm going to talk about later on. So partition is something that means you divide into, that you segment into something. So what Supermemo said, that the circadian lows cannot be partitioned. That means that it said that you cannot really move the hours that your circadian lows actually are. So basically, it's saying that it's pretty much always 2 to 4 a.m. and you can't really change it for the most part. That's what it really means. Periodicity is the continuous cycle period of circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm, as we know, rotate around a cyclic manner, and it's a 24-hour period. So circadian periodicity is just our circadian rhythm. It's 24 hours for the most part. And the phase shift, which is also a very important term to keep in mind, is that it means the adjustment in the sleep hours. For example, you often see the terms advanced sleep phase or delayed sleep phase disorder. So a phase shift is whether you try to move your sleep forward, which is later in the night, or backward, which is earlier in the night. So if one day you sleep much later than usual, so the next day you probably sleep earlier than usual to make up for the 24-hour circadian rhythm for the most part. I'm trying to say that on the basis of normal human circadian rhythm, which is around 24 hours average. So the conclusion of the argument is that polyphasic sleeping doesn't work, and like I said before, it is based on the models of Everyman 3 and Everyman or nap-only schedules. Because these schedules totally skip the circadian lows, which are very beneficial for resting, and they only focus on getting more naps and sleep reduction, and it basically ignores health concepts. So that we are clear about the definition and what Supermemo really means. Here I will provide a series of counter-arguments. We have 6 in total, broken down into smaller ones. So the first counter-argument that I have is that Supermemo didn't take into account of segmented sleep, which happened in the pre-industrial era. So what segmented sleep means is that if you look at the nap chart here, you sleep for the first chunk from earlier in the night, like 9 or 10 p.m. and to midnight or afterwards. The related research article for this says that there are many variants of segmented sleep that people did back then, and people can go back to bed later in the night and back to the morning with a very flexible range of time. So the core sleep is up to maybe midnight or 1 a.m. Usually it's around midnight. That's when people woke up. And so they stay up for a few hours. They did different things like chores, chopping woods, reading poetry, or even having sex. And then after staying up for a couple hours, they went back to bed again. And this has been a natural process before the introduction of artificial lighting, like the blue lights that we have today, which disrupts our sleep rhythm at night if we abuse it. So as you can see, the segmented sleep schedule skips probably 1 or 2 hours of the circadian lows as we defined it before. So a very normal and standard segmented schedule probably means that the second sleep, you probably sleep from maybe like 3:30 or 4 to 7 or 8 a.m. around dawn, and you wake up. So that doesn't mean that you have to sleep through one main chunk throughout the night. And if you say, and if Supermemo says that segmented sleep is just biphasic sleeping, which isn't polyphasic, so I will get into that later on, but for now we'll go with that. So the conclusion here is that the circadian lows can be partitioned to fit the lifestyle and the consistent sleep times, as these people did it without any kinds of alarm support. It's just a natural sleep pattern for them, and so they are able to know like what time they are able to go back to bed again to make use of the circadian low hours, which is probably not necessarily from 2 to 4 a.m. like Supermemo claimed to be. Alright, so after this kind of argument, if you have any questions, we'll talk about it briefly and then I'll continue. If not, I'll just continue right away. No questions? Okay. The second counter argument that I will mention is based on the phase response curve paper that Supermemo used as evidence to suggest that polyphasic sleeping is not a viable sleeping scheme. So if you haven't read this newspaper, which I assume that you haven't, I will just summarize it for you. So the phase response paper is basically a study about how light and other Zeitgebers means the environmental and lighting cues, for example, food, exercise, social activities, blue lights, etc., that measure the human circadian rhythms response to those, and see if sleep time can be shifted. So it is called a phase shift, to see how the results turn out. If you actually read through the research article later on, it basically means that if you are exposed to blue lights, social events, or food and exercise, especially exercise, your sleep phase is delayed automatically to later parts in the night. So rather than sleeping at midnight like usual, you end up sleeping at about maybe 2 or 3 a.m. It's not that big of a problem if it's just a one-time thing, but if you keep delaying your sleep, then you're gradually approaching free-running sleep, which is a non-24-hour disorder, like I mentioned earlier. So that's not a good thing at all. You don't want to twist your circadian rhythm. So that's basically what the phase response curve paper said, that you can shift your circadian rhythm up to 3 hours each day. As suggested by Supermemo, it means that humans can be enchained to 27-hour circadian rhythm, which is a very, very unrealistic approach. It did admit that it's very hard to shift the circadian rhythm more than 24 hours, especially if it's more than 1 hour from day to day. So 27 hours, you can only think of nut jobs who are able to do that if they are normal 24-hour people. If they are suffering from the delayed sleep phase syndrome, then I mean, no shit. The next thing that is what sets the polyphasic community very different from what Supermemo said is that we have a dark period. If you don't know what it is, it basically means the 2-hour period with no blue light exposure before the core sleep, and less than 1000 hertz with red lights. This is the info that I pulled from polyphasic.net. So if it is incorrect, feel free to correct me. You probably need to turn off the echo because I hear my voice.
Okay.
Okay, so what it means is that with a dark period setup, you don't get exposed to the blue lights as blue lights disrupt melatonin's secretion in the night, and you would want to sleep more deeply. So that's how we set up our circadian rhythm every 24 hours, and we use it as a means to protect our sleep at night, especially to get more slow wave sleep to be generated and not to be delayed later parts into the night. So this is very healthy, and avoiding blue lights before bedtime is something definitely recommended for you if you can afford the time to do that. During the dark period, which can be from 2 hours to 1 hour as minimum, if you are uncomfortable with the length, you can still do other things like surfing the web and just normal chilling stuff that doesn't require hardcore exercise or whatever. So our community has provided better equipment to protect the sleepers against the blue light exposure at night, which is by having a pair of red laser glasses and filtration of blue light from computer and phone. So feel free to check out on Polyphasic.net about how they actually work and stuff like that if you're interested. And from the dark period, it can be concluded that many adapted sleepers from the community have very enjoyed the dark period with no blue light exposure. It does make a difference without any kind of filtration in the past. And the results have been pretty positive, that it is actually a very necessary thing to do, and it probably helps with the adaptation, even though how much it helps is debatable. But moving on to the third counter argument, this one is also a second paper that Supermemo used, that is called the process underlying sleep regulation paper. So if you don't really follow and haven't read what it's about, it basically mentions the homeostatic and circadian rhythm preservation processes. That's how the body works. That it follows the certain type of circadian rhythm, and the homeostatic pressure means that there has to be some kind of a structure about sleep as a sleep defense mechanism. So you can't just easily reduce sleep and then get away with it. That's basically the premise. However, both the articles, the phase shift and this sleep regulation paper fail to mention is that none of these papers actually have any words about polyphasic sleeping. Like none. If you search polyphasic sleep in both of those papers, it never gets mentioned. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. And about how polyphasic sleeping is different from monophasic sleep, we'll get to that when I get to discuss what Claudio Stampi, the author of the book Why We Nap, has to say about the matter. The second thing about this sleep regulation paper is that the sleep pressure is augmented by sleep deprivation but reduced by daytime naps. This isn't something that I come up with. This is the verbatim line from the research paper itself in the introductory section. So what it means is that the sleep pressure will build if you don't get enough sleep. That is pretty simple. That says it's augmented by sleep deprivation, which is pretty obvious. I mean, if you're sleep deprived, then sleep pressure will keep increasing over time. But it is reduced by daytime naps, it said. So since it is very generic as to how many naps are taken during the day or what kind of naps to be chosen, what we can interpret from this is that daytime naps actually work to reduce the sleep pressure, and that you feel more alert after that. And that's how polyphasic sleeping has been based on. You take a nap during the day and probably some other nap maybe in late afternoon, like 4 or 5 p.m., like on some Everyman 2 schedule, and then when you're adapted, your homeostatic process is maintained and it's back to balance again, like you get enough sleep. And just because you reduce your sleep doesn't mean that you won't get enough. So that's basically the point. The third point from this paper is that polyphasic sleeping patterns are affected by circadian rhythm and homeostatic pressure, which I already mentioned. For schedules like Everyman and dual core sleep, they also are 24-hour schedules. You basically have a stable fixed time schedule every day, so you pretty much go to bed at the same time every day, unless there is any kind of consistency that forces you to move your sleep. which shouldn't be that bad if you complete adaptation period and later on you can just move to sleep around more freely without suffering from sleep deprivation. The fourth point here, which is also very important, is that the circadian peaks actually exist. So people might say that it is not real at all, but the research article from polyphasic.net actually includes information about how the SWS pressure rises the highest around the evening from 9 p.m. to midnight. And then we also have the REM period from 6 to 9 a.m., which is where most REM sleep will actually occur if you try to sleep, have some kind of a sleep there. And we'll talk about how repartitioning works later on and how it ties to this concept. And largely both of these papers, the sleep regulation one and the phase shift, never really mentions the long-term effects of polyphasic sleeping. And this is some very hard data to gather because really none of the studies have shown any kind of long-term effects that polyphasic sleepers might incur, because it's very hard to keep track of people out, especially every day after years, because there are several other commitments to do, and being put under surveillance 24 isn't something that you will be comfortable with. So most polyphasic experiments that we have known so far ended up just after a couple of weeks, which is enough to maybe claim that adaptation period is over, like a couple of weeks, like 4 or 5 weeks. But that's all about it. Like you won't be able to know the long-term effects until there's an official study about it somehow. Unfortunately, but it happens. Okay, so the fourth counter argument that I'm going to talk about is the core argument as to why polyphasic sleeping can work. It is called Claudio Stampi's Why We Nap. Since I'm focusing on presenting the slide and information, there will be other people asking in the sleep channel. If you can tell them that they can join, that would be great. Anyone can join. There's no limitations at all. So yes, please take care of that for me. Much appreciated. So there are 3 chapters from Claudio Stampi's book that I would like to focus on. So they are chapters 7, 12, and 13. Since it's very long and I don't want to drag out like the conclusions from each chapter, so I just summarize them all in one spot. You can check the document later on to verify it, but I'm not trying to falsify any kind of information here. So the first conclusion is that the circadian rhythm seems unaffected. This has been tested with nap-only ultra-short sleeping schedules with a time span of up to 48 days with a 3-hour nap-only type. This experiment was done to test if sleep reduction can be maintained for an extended period of time. Unfortunately, the sample size is very small, as it is very personal to just observe one artist who slept 8 hours monophasically in this experiment and carried on 48 days later, and he slept only 3 hours per day. He did some kind of Uberman schedule, but it wasn't exactly 20 minutes each. It's about I say 30 minutes from the experiment that adds up to 3 hours. But the form is similar to Uberman sleep, so one nap every 4 hours. So it has been concluded from that and other experiments that energy dips also have the same occurrences as those on a monophasic schedule. So this is something very interesting to note, because we don't really know if it is also true for long-term and long sustenance of the schedule, but it seems to make sense, because if you are used to a schedule, then you are used to sleeping at those allocated time spots. So basically, when it's time to nap and when it's time to have a call or something like that, your body reminds you that, and you just lie down and sleep. It's that simple in a polyphasic schedule.
Excuse me, I want to point out that in our series about whether polyphasic sleeping is dangerous, I bring out this as a point. If anyone can show that the sleep times are actually a side here, but as you mentioned earlier, they dictate the timings of your circadian rhythm. If it were to be shown that that was the case, that could be used in order to show that polyphasic sleep might be dangerous. Like people have to show that that would be the case, that they actually affect the circadian rhythm in a way, and there doesn't seem to be any evidence for it at the moment, actually not. Mentions that they don't have that. That's a very good argument for safety of polyphasic.
Can you repeat what you said about the last two sentences? You are kind of cutting out.
Sorry. Yes. It is, as Claudio Sanchez in his book, that's argument for the safety of polyphasic sleeping, that it's actually not dangerous.
Okay. I don't know. Your mic seems to be kind of having some weird sounds. I mean, I don't know. Maybe edit that out later on, probably. But that's okay. I could still hear you. Okay, so moving on to the second point from Claudio Stampi's book, it's said that personal motivation is important for successful polyphasic adaptation. Okay, so this is something extremely important that I have been trying to talk about to you later on. So the reason why the artist was able to sleep an Uberman-like schedule and maintain it for up to 48 days and didn't really suffer any kind of cognitive impairment was to show that it is actually possible to do a nap-only schedule, but that's only because your lifestyle either forces you to commit to it, or if you have, like, I don't know, maybe absurd motivation that controls maybe your stress response in the body, so that you can only sleep that short. There's also a story about a Frenchman who traveled around the world with on a boat, maybe in 47 days. It was a record, I think. Yeah, you can look it up, and it says that he had to nap in only 30 minutes, and he cannot sleep longer than that, because traveling on the sea is as important as it sounds. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the traveling, he did say that he was very tired, but it actually did keep him survive for that period of time. So I mean, maybe in survival situations you can pull it off, but the reason why you probably can't pull it off for the most part, and for most other people, they just end up oversleeping, is because of other several reasons that I will talk about next. The third point that Stampy made is that polyphasic sleep is a pattern in nature, so it's kind of natural. So for example, segmented sleep from a pre-industrial era, like I talked about earlier. And Stampy also noted that monophasic sleep is the exception to humans because of the environment that we are in today, that forces us to adapt to and adopt some kind of monophasic lifestyle. Next, we have in older people, night sleep is more fragmented, and daytime naps become more frequent, even in the healthy people. This is something that is also very popular, and this isn't something weird at all, because you can ask literally the elderly people in your house, and they should be able to probably tell you that their sleep isn't that great, and they probably sometimes take naps too. So yeah. The fifth point here is that the brief naps have recuperative values. So what it means is that even if a nap is meant to be a short one, like a power nap of 10 minutes or 20 minutes, it does help with refreshing your mind at least a little bit, to some certain extent. So taking naps sometimes can help you to become more alert. And lastly, on this slide, the experiments concluded that humans can adapt to a wide array of polyphasic patterns at different levels. So this is very important, because what Supermemo seem to think is that humans can adapt to any kind of polyphasic schedule, which is something that I don't agree with either, because I think that there's still a limit to which a human can adapt to what kind of schedule that is, and it depends on the situation. So I think that Supermemo probably misrepresented the information that we had, and what Claudio Stampi was trying to say. He said that humans can adapt to polyphasic patterns with different degrees. So that means that some people might be able to adapt to some kind of everyman pattern, but have trouble with a dual core experience because they aren't used to staying up at night. And some people might be able to pull off an Uberman schedule in maybe a month, but normal people regularly can't because they keep oversleeping. So there's some kind of limit there, but it doesn't really say that humans can't really adapt to anything, which is partly false. The part two of this counter argument is that the next point is that the ability to fall asleep quickly at any time during 24 hours can facilitate adaptation. This point is interesting for me to include in here because over the years in the Discord and Reddit community, I've seen some people able to fall asleep pretty quickly. In other words, they have quick sleep onset. So what it means is that they can actually sleep at pretty much like most hours during the day. Like it's totally in their control. But whether that's healthy or not is still debatable. But I mean, if there aren't any kinds of health defects as I reported, then there is some ability that you probably should embrace, especially when you start polyphasic sleeping, because people struggle with falling asleep at allocated times, and a lot of core sleeps and naps probably don't really work out until after a couple days or even a couple weeks for them to be able to fall asleep in the naps. The next point is that we still don't really know much about a polyphasic practice, as Stampy admitted, and so more mechanisms about the practice and entrainment of a polyphasic schedules as the body adopts needs more research on this. So it is kind of inconclusive because you don't really know how different polyphasic sleeping is compared to monophasic sleeping, especially when you start introducing naps and cores into your schedule. It can be very different to the monophasic sleep. The factors that determine the adaptability to the polyphasic schedules vary with chronotypes, non-nappers, habitual nappers, long or short sleepers, motivation, etc. This is just one of the few factors that have been listed, so I just feel like summarizing them here. About chronotype, for example, if you are an evening person, you might find dual core schedules very attractive because you get to sleep early in the night. If you are a night owl, you might find dual core schedules very fitting as well because there is a period of wakefulness during the night. So technically you still stay awake at night even though you sleep earlier and then you sleep in later on in the later hours of the night. So something like that can definitely work out to your advantage. The next point is that sleep repartitioning does occur when sleep architecture is changed drastically from monophasic sleeping. Sleep repartitioning is a very intriguing subject that I will spare an entire section about it later on to talk about it, as well as some of the data from our community, which probably will interest you about how adapted sleep feels like and what it turns out to be. The next point here is that more questions about the sleep regulatory functions are yet to be answered about polyphasic sleeping and what makes it different from monophasic sleep. So we can see that Dr. Wozniak Supermemo's lone evidence is not sufficient to conclude the infeasibility of polyphasic sleeping because none of his mentioned articles have the word polyphasic sleeping in it. So it's very indirect evidence and it can't really be used to suggest that polyphasic sleeping doesn't work. And lastly, the most important point from Claudio Stampy is that sleep under polyphasic schedules cannot be accounted for exclusively within the framework of what we know about nocturnal monophasic sleeping. The magnitude of this statement is actually insane because this is the first step that we need to approach to polyphasic sleeping. What this means is that semantically it means that you cannot really apply what monophasic sleep does to the body to polyphasic sleep schedules because they're entirely different. And what we know of monophasic sleeping may not be applied to polyphasic schedules at all, or maybe only to some certain extent, which is still largely a question to be explored in the future. So yes, it's very important to note that polyphasic sleeping is different from monophasic sleeping in the observation that the circadian rhythm is protected in 24 hours if you follow a strict schedule. Okay, so the fifth counter argument, which is a more fun one that I want to talk about, is what Supermemo's generalizations are and how they are wrong. So these are the small arguments used by Supermemo in the face of common sense. I have to say that it is a facade, which means that it is some kind of fakery to show that how polyphasic sleeping doesn't work. So a few points to be addressed from Supermemo are: first, biphasic sleep is not detachable from polyphasic sleeping. but can be detached from monophasic sleep behavior category. From our standpoint, biphasic sleeping is some kind of quasi polyphasic behavior, because technically, I mean, to be on a polyphasic schedule today, you need to have at least 3 sleeps in your schedule. So I mean, biphasic sleep is more like a middle ground, but it's still to be included in the polyphasic category, because it's more like a quasi and a partial behavior. That is, I mean, monophasic sleep and polyphasic sleep has been separated into 2 different categories by Stampy. So I mean, if you look at a monophasic sleeper, it's pretty simple. He does only 1 sleep per day, but if there is more than 1 sleep, then it's definitely some kind of polyphasic behavior. Although it's not entirely to the backbone of the polyphasic definition, which includes just naps during the day. Like every sleep has the same length, like 4 20-minute naps as on Tesla's schedule, or 4 90-minute naps, or whatever that is. But the definition is outdated. The second point is that the primary target of Supermemo has been the Uberman sleep schedule and Everyman 3, and we all know that both of these schedules test the limit of humans to adapt, and both of them have very high failing rate, especially when you factor in like exercising and social factors. Both of these schedules can fall out of line pretty quickly. Uberman only gives 2 hours sleep per day, and Everyman 3 traditionally gives 4 hours sleep, which is very low. The third point is that adaptations to hard polyphasic schedules with extreme sleep reduction often fail, but it has been observed that it was largely because of the insufficient alarm system, not because it's very pulled off, at least in terms of short term. Now, I'm not saying that all of you should go ahead and try out Uberman sleep schedule right now, because it's possible. What I'm trying to get here is that the people who are under the experiments in Stampy's collection of studies are put under very strict control in the environment setting. It's in the laboratory limit. So what it means is that these people are woken up after whatever time that the sleep researchers want them to sleep, and so they don't really oversleep at all. And so they are also kind of motivated as guinea pigs for the experiment about polyphasic sleeping. So there's a reason for them to actually be able to wake up and not oversleep. So you have to differentiate between a multitude of factors that help you be able to pull off a polyphasic schedule or not. These people have what I call the human assistance that helps them, be able to get through the adaptation phase allegedly, and then be able to reach a more plateau state that is called the adaptive state, possibly on these schedules. So that's why they never have to worry about oversleeping at all. And if they do happen to oversleep, it's usually not that much, because human supervision is there, and coupled with machines too. Excuse me. The next point is sleep repartitioning, which is a process in polyphasic sleeping. It happens when total sleep is reduced to preserve the amount of slow wave sleep and REM sleep. So what it means is that you rearrange your sleep stages, and you cut out the amount of light sleep, especially the NREM2, to be able to get in slow wave sleep and REM sleep. This cannot be confirmed on nap-only schedules though, because we don't really have any readings from adapted people from it. So this is based on any schedules with some kind of core sleep, that the data that we have. We'll be able to see some of the data of adapted sleepers later on, but we still have an ongoing EEG labeling project. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to fetch a lot of data, and so only 2 cases were present, which we will see in a minute. Next is that the long-term entrainment with a polyphasic schedule can be done without alarm support. This is also very important to note, because what Supermemo doesn't really understand is that you can't really adapt to a polyphasic sleep pattern because you always need an alarm to wake up. However, this is largely false, because after some time staying on the schedule, it depends on how different your schedule is compared to monophasic sleep. You will be able to sleep without alarm if you adapt. So a very good example in our community that I can use to represent What I'm talking about is the sleeper Alice Orr. She is in the currently adapted category in Discord. You will be easily able to see her on the top. So if you want to ask her more information about her adaptations, feel free to message her or do whatever you want. So the reason why she is a great example is that she is an adult. She is 34, as in the most recent interview with our community. She has been on the E3 extended schedule for roughly 2 years. The E3 extended schedule is basically an easier everyman 4.5 hour core sleep and 3 20-minute naps spread during the day. The schedule has shown its very resilience to recovery and healing. She was able to exercise and work around her schedule to maintain her sleep. She is an 8-hour monophasic sleeper, which is like the majority of us out here who need that much sleep under monophasic condition to be able to optimize performance and cognitive functions. However, after some time, and now she uses alarm just as a kind of last resort measure to make sure that she doesn't oversleep. But from her account, it has been shown that it is possible to wake up before the alarm, even in the naps, even in the 20-minute naps, not just the core sleep. Which leads me to the next point here, is that by categorizing polyphasic sleepers to be either delusional or liars by Supermemo, it only shows how narrow-minded Dr. Wozniak really is as a scientist with a 2-decade resume in research, but that is not about polyphasic sleeping at all. So I don't really understand how some people would lie on the internet, especially as an example of Alice Orr. She is 34. There is absolutely no reason for her to actually fake about this, because there's literally nothing to gain. It's similar when you're also using the flat Earth argument. Flat Earthers say that the Earth is flat because the governments are controlling the people and trying to shape their agenda that they have been covering up for centuries, because that's what governments do these days. No, it's not that. It's far of a stretch to immediately assume that any polyphasic sleeper who are able to adapt are liars, because the gains are literally nothing. Like you can see it right away. What do governments gain when they lie to its citizens about that the Earth is flat or round or whatever shape that is? There's absolutely no reason why one would do this. Although it is always some kind of healthy skepticism to be kept with successful adaptation, but outright claiming them like this as some kind of reactionary response to something that doesn't really fit into your agenda doesn't really make sense and shouldn't be approached in science. Alright, so the fifth counter-argument section is about other comments on the Supermemo's site about polyphasic sleeping. So this is the direct citations from the site itself, and you should be able to see for yourself as well when you go on the site. The first comment is that you do not need to be a junkie to study addiction. My response to that is, you do not need to be a sleep scientist to understand that our knowledge about sleep is still very small. Which makes total sense, because what Supermemo has been assuming is that polyphasic sleeping just doesn't work because of some two research papers that say that only monophasic sleep and biphasic sleeping are viable sleeping patterns, and free-running sleep, which is proven to be a disorder. The second point is, for starters, I do not claim to be a polyphasic sleeper, as Dr. Wozniak said himself, and my response to that is, your authority and understanding on polyphasic sleep is probably just slightly better than non-polyphasic sleepers and other researchers as well, because I mean, if you're not an expert, then how can we trust your opinions on this? We have been able to show that from Claudio Stampi and other adapted sleepers that polyphasic sleeping operates under a very different mechanism compared to monophasic sleeping, and it's not the same thing. So if you're not an expert, then you literally have no say on this. That's my opinion, whatever you want to look at it. But yeah. The third comment is that free-running sleep cannot be compared to overeating, and my response to that is, sure, you won't be sleeping like more than usual, just like overeating when you just keep getting more and more food and you keep getting fat. I mean, it's just that you are eating worse because fearing sleep, it means that you are twisting your circadian rhythm by delaying it, by sleeping whenever you want, and you don't follow the environmental cues to suggest that the time that you need to sleep needs to be kept consistent. There is also excuse me. There's also an article about health, about how it is common for doctors to say that having a stable and fixed sleep times every day is recommended for health reasons, because I mean, sleeping at the same time every day definitely provides health benefit, and it helps control the sleep and wake hours. For free running sleep, you have no control over that because you sleep whenever you want. Like, eventually you will reach a threshold where your body is unable to determine if you will be able to sleep at a specific hours when social obligations and other commitments in your life come into play, and you will be sleep deprived because you don't get enough sleep from your free running sleep schedules in today's society. So good luck with that. The fourth point is that the maximum efficiency of sleep is accomplished when sleeping without artificial sleep regulation, Supermemo claims. My response to that is, it's true, but that's also why in the long run a polyphasic schedule like E3 extended can be comfortably done without any alarm support and still follows a 24-hour rhythm. And I would say, as we are normal 24-hour circadian rhythm people, we don't want to become 26 or 27 hours. We know full well that free running sleep is not good, and it is a disorder for a damned reason. The fifth quote from Supermemo is that my true and only agenda behind writing the article was to stop young men from doing stupid things to your health. And I have to say, I really appreciate the sincerity, because a lot back then, things spiraled out of control real fast. People with 13 or 14 years old wanting to try a workman schedule, it was painful to read. So hey, at least we agree on something. But regardless of how it is, it still doesn't show how polyphasic sleep doesn't work in that sense. So yeah. The final point in this slide is that Supermemo poses a question itself: can battling polyphasic sleep hurt Supermemo? And my response to that is, well, it depends. But a lot of adaptive sleepers who have good life and good control over the sleep and wake cycles patterns, and have control of their work schedules and social time, will totally disagree with what Supermemo has to say, especially considering that you are a non-expert. And they simply just won't take what you say seriously when you advocate for free running sleep. Okay, so this is part 2 of the argument about the other comments. So the next thing that Supermemo said is that I only took on the subject as a short-term assignment on polyphasic sleeping. So what it said is that it's not something like what would interest Dr. Wozniak in studying. So my response is, it's no wonder that you portray a very lopsided understanding about polyphasic sleeping. It shows how limited your knowledge actually is. The next question that Supermemo has for its audience is if polyphasic sleepers are dumb. And my response is, I mean, there are dumb and smart people everywhere. So some are dumb for sure, but the majority that we know really aren't, and just probably sometimes people are big-headed about trying out different things that they think could work for them and end up failing. But I mean, that's their fault, because they have to take responsibility for their failures. Some people, including a very young ones, blindly try to reduce the sleep to the very minimum, which is an Uberman schedule, which is widespreadly attempted back then, and as you all know, what it turns out, it's not that great. It's failing everywhere. The ninth point about Supermemo's comment is that scientists are too busy to study freak ideas, it said. My response is, well, polyphasic sleeping definitely doesn't seem to fit your narrative. So that doesn't mean that it's not possible. I mean, Claudio Stampi studies those ideas, so does that mean that he is a freak too? Right? It doesn't make any sense. Number 10, adaptation is a myth, and my response is Claudio Stampi, with a mass collection of adaptation attempts and other sources, will definitely disagree with you, not to mention this community. If you want to go the anecdotal route, like I have no reason to believe that you are freeing your sleep, given that you are a sleep researcher. But hey, that's totally possible, and if it works out for you, then sure, that's cool. And you have no right to negate our experiences about polyphasic sleeping either, because you can't really verify it. So it goes both ways. Stampy also noted that humans can adapt to polyphasic patterns, but with different degrees. So again, this is the point from earlier that I was making. So so sometimes it has to do with what kind of schedule you are choosing, because if it's a very hard schedule, for example 4-hour schedule like a DC3 or Everyman 3, then definitely your chances of failing will be very high. But if you choose something like E2 extended or E3 extended, then I mean you definitely have a good shot at adapting. The 11th quote from Supermemo, which is also the last one, is what is my agenda? Supermemo asked, and my response is advertising that free running sleep is healthy is a dangerous idea, and it makes men think the wrong way about sleeping at inconsistent hours, and finally destroying their circadian rhythm for good, because of the chaotic sleep-wake hours that only happens in the delayed sleep phase order patients, and you don't want to turn the majority of humans into patients, right? That's not something that I would agree with. Excuse me. And it is classified by the World Health Organization as a non-24-hour circadian disorder for a damn reason, like I said before. And only some of your blind supporters would use free running sleep as a means to justify how good it really is. But again, it's really hard to pull off in today's society, so I definitely wish you luck on that. If you are a normal, healthy 24-hour circadian rhythm person, like you are now, I assume, then what I would say is that don't fix what isn't broken. And if you try to twist your sleep and experiment with 26 or 27 hours, you will be plagued in constant sleep deprivation, poor sleep quality when sleep hygiene goes out the window, and you will eventually have to regret it. We have had experiments of people done with a free running sleep before, and it doesn't turn out great. And a lot of results have shown that 24-hour people who try to pull off a free running sleep often end up very tired, very irritated, and very sleep deprived, and couldn't really function with the blur in the cognitive performance, which is very similar to the adaptation symptoms in polyphasic sleeping. So yeah, just because you're trying to sleep differently doesn't mean that you aren't adapting to something, at least in our terminology, that is. And there has been a lot of evidence against free running sleep. If you search it up on Google, the term FRD standing for free running sleep disorder pops up literally everywhere, except for Supermemo's fans, that is. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about is repartitioning and how it actually works. If you look into the document right now, on that slide you will be able to see the baselines on polyphasic patterns. So to the left is the E1 adaptation, and to the right is an E2 adaptation. Both schedules have a 6-hour core sleep, so you can say that, well, sure, it works because it's a long core sleep. Then I'll talk about it later. But what you see is that during adaptation, the amount of slow wave sleep and REM are inefficient and insufficient because you're trying to reduce your sleep, and so it's still messed up. But after adaptation is done, you see the beautiful distribution of sleep stages. The slow wave sleep goes into the first 2 or 3 cycles of the night, and then the rest is covered by REM sleep. So in the end, you still get enough amount of both of these vital sleep stages. And the same can be said for the E2 extended core sleep. It's the same thing, even with 2 added naps. The E1 adaptation baseline here was done by Crimson. He adapted to this schedule a while ago and has been on E1 for a very long time. And the E2 extended schedule was done by Faley. He has a very high sleep requirement, maybe like 9 hours monophasic sleeping to be rested. Most likely because of possible genetics, or just that he's still growing. So that explains the higher average of sleep. But he managed to adapt to E2 extended, which was a total of 6 hours and 40 minutes. which is an impressive feat on his own, and he was able to be productive and maintain his performance after adaptation, and he probably adapted to E2 extended twice, if I remember correctly, on 2 different occasions. So the next slide, the previous one was from the ZO sleep device, and it has an accuracy of 71% to 81% as the mean value. And there is also a study in the reference section about how accurate it actually is as a sleep tracking device. And so what you often use, like a sleep cycle app or Fitbit or whatever they are, only give you a very low accuracy, maybe less than 50% accuracy if you want to track your sleep. So definitely not recommend to use those. God, my vocal cords are kind of hurting, so I hope to finish this soon. So this is using the Polyphasic Open EEG. As you see in here, this is a segmented sleep schedule. So I mean, it's kind of hard to see. Apologies. So I'm just gonna summarize what happens here. So the amount of REM sleep here is 1 hour and 19 minutes, which is about 80 minutes, and the amount of SWS or NREM3 is 1 hour and 4 minutes, which is equivalent to about 1 hour. So you can see that this segmented sleep as a sleep stage repartitioning and separation into each sleep. The schedule was a 3.5 hour and 3.5 hour core sleep with some wake gaps in between. Unfortunately, I can't really fetch like how many hours of wake time were between the core sleep, but I assume around probably 3 hours, since we have been recommending that for a while, or maybe 2 hours as well, because some people were able to pull that off in the past. So the component of REM sleep and slow wave sleep here are kind of evenly distributed into the segmented sleep, and given that segmented sleep gives 7 hours total on this schedule, we don't really see much repartitioning as what our theory proposes, that if you sleep with a core sleep in the slow wave sleep peak region, which is before midnight, 9 p.m. to midnight, and then you sleep again for the second core sleep around dawn, which is maybe 5 to 8 a.m., something like that, then your first core will have more slow wave than REM sleep, and your second core will have more REM than slow wave sleep. It has been kind of confirmed by scientists in the past that there is some kind of mechanisms relating it that way, but the repartitioning isn't clear on high total sleep schedules, because you're still getting a lot of sleep, and so it's kind of natural for you to get this much anyway. So the Polyphasic Open EEG has about 83% accuracy, which is higher than that of ZO, and there's also a research article on this accuracy, so it's something that you can build around if you want to track your sleep. So this first score here, as you can see, is the dawn sleep. So the REM sleep totals around 80 minutes, and slow wave sleep was much less, like 60 minutes. The second image here shows otherwise. This is a dusk sleep, which is done before midnight. So you can see there is only 36 minutes of REM sleep in here, but a whopping 1 hour and 46 minutes of slow wave sleep, which is equivalent to 2 hours and a half. And that is definitely a lot of slow waves right there, because we have known from circadian rhythm that you don't get a lot of slow wave sleep when it comes to the morning. It's REM sleep's dominance instead. So just to show you that sleep is organized into a specific order when you adapt it, and you shouldn't be too worried about it. The next thing about repartitioning that I feel need to cover here is that Claudio Stampi also mentioned briefly about it, but he doesn't really use this term. This term is just what our community uses to denote what is going on here. So Stampy said that slow wave sleep is preserved under polyphasic schedules that have a core sleep. This is not what he said directly. This is my inference from what he said. So what he said is that the first 3-hour core, the 3-cycle core schedules, like E2 or E3 extended, that have a 4.5-hour core sleep at least, will have enough slow wave sleep for optimal body functions, assuming that you don't have some super high slow wave sleep requirement or something like that. The second observation from Stampy is that REM episodes are very frequent during polyphasic schedules, and you can see that the repartitioning of REM sleep that is tries to get into the short power naps is possible concept. If you are new to polyphasic sleeping and you are wondering that you won't get REM in your naps, then over time you will, when enough sleep deprivation has been accrued. The third point is that the REM and slow wave sleep are mutually exclusive for the most part and rarely occur together. This is a very interesting concept in nap-only experiments. Since Claudio Stampy focuses on a lot of nap-only experiments, then this is a very important point that forms our basis of how nap-only schedules actually work. It's not concrete evidence, by the way, and the limitation in Stampy's book is that he didn't really prolong the experiment for more than a couple months to finally conclude if the composition of sleep architecture is the same as the time that he wrote the book or not. So by saying that REM and slow wave sleep are mutually exclusive, what it means is that if you are trying to do a dual core schedules that have a lower total sleep than segmented but have the same mechanism as with one sleep at night and one sleep around dawn with some waking hours between the cores and then have a nap during the day, then it also suggests that the separation of REM sleep and slow wave sleep into two different core sleep will behave differently, and you will be able to observe the more distinction of both of these vital sleep stages, which is a very interesting observation and makes dual core schedules very worth a try if you ever want to attempt one. A more important observation from Stampy is that during short-term but not long-term observation is that slow wave sleep is not denied regardless of what schedules were being enacted, but REM sleep is penalized during adaptation. So this resonates with the first point that slow wave sleep is preserved under polyphasic schedules that have at least 3-hour core sleep, because you are sleeping the same like monophasic sleeping, which is that you get most of your slow wave sleep in your first 3 sleep cycles, and you get the rest of your REM sleep in the remaining 2 or 3 cycles as well. So since the night sleep goes with that order, if you suddenly cut sleep, then cut to 4.5 hours or 5 hours, that means that your slow wave sleep will still be protected, but you will be REM deprived because you're trying to alter the structure of REM sleep and trying to distribute it into different sleeps in the day depending on your schedule. So that's why the basis that slow wave sleep is not denied regardless of schedules is very interesting, and it serves as a very strong basis as to why some of the polyphasic schedules like E2 are safer than E3 and how they behave that way. Okay, so the next thing that I want to discuss after all the counter arguments, after all the presented main counter arguments, is the viability of the nap-only polyphasic schedules. As a starter, I will start with myself that I and a lot of other people, including non-polyphasic believers and other polyphasic believers, that nap-only schedules might have a health risk long term if you maintain it for a long period of time. And for now, my position on the nap-only schedules is that it probably can work for the short term, and if you are motivated enough to try it out. So maybe you can survive with it, maybe like 2 months. Probably if you're highly motivated, you can pull it off. But if you're not that motivated, or if you're not in a lab control environment or have a human assistance, then you most likely will end up failing because you will not be able to get up. So this is taken from one study on Uberman sleep. This is a very good one I found in 2013, which is 3 years after Supermemo wrote the article about Uberman sleep and how polyphasic sleeping is not viable. So this study has the following information and results. So the name of the study is the Endocrine and Cognitive Effects from the Uberman Schedule. The experiment consisted of 8 healthy young males, and they took one 20-minute nap every 4 hours. So pretty standard, standard Uberman schedule. The total sleep was only 2 hours, just to make that clear. There were also physiological testing, blood 24 hours, and blood sampling every 30 minutes to make sure that there was no change or nothing weird going on in the system. There were also other tests done on individuals such as declarative memory, reasoning capability, psychomotor vigilance, and so on. You'll be able to read the study as a link in the reference section later on when I get to that. So the results are that the 7 subjects terminated the Uberman schedule, but mostly due to the social life, which is worth to note that it's not because they can't tolerate the sleep deprivation. It's just that they have to quit because of social constraint after 3 weeks in. And it is also worth noting that these sleepers are not mutants, by the way. They require a normal sleep requirement every day, like 7 or 8 hours monophasic, and they are healthy. So that makes it more objective that way in terms of generating data points. The remaining subject, strangely enough, did not show any cognitive impairments, and that's after 5 weeks. So, I mean, 5 weeks is usually the duration of time that you would consider successful adaptation to certain polyphasic schedules, and not only schedules that might be possible, because 5 weeks is equivalent to 35 days. And Pulosic, the inventor of the Uberman schedule, said that she felt perfect on Uberman after 30 to 45 days. So, I mean, 35 days is a pretty reasonable assessment to say whether someone is adapted to Uberman or not. And other results include that the cortisol and melatonin release did not differ between the 2 test sessions. Unfortunately, I was not able to fetch the full study because of copyright and some kind of blocking content. So I was only able to extract the data from the abstract section. If you're able to get the full article, feel free to link it, and we'll all appreciate it. What's worth noting here is that the growth hormone release was suppressed entirely, and the secretion pattern changed entirely. So this growth hormone release mechanism thing was said to start its releasing cycle once per day before you sleep. But right now, for this Uberman schedule, it was observed that the secretion pattern changed to 6 small peaks, which are observed after each nap. So that means that the body is operating in a very different way, other than monophasic sleep, to try to accommodate with the new terms and survival with the new kind of a sleeping scheme. And what is worth noting here is that the growth hormone is very necessary if you are trying to gain weight, or if you're trying to, if you are growing, like in the teenager years. On Uberman schedule, this hormone was suppressed entirely, suggesting that you will not be able to exercise or do any kind of muscle growth training because that's simply not possible. Which is what we also included in the nap-only schedules that what we know so far. Exercising on a woman is pretty much impossible. And some of the studies, as Honorary mentions, also said that Uberman schedule attempters did not show any kind of cognitive impairments, but there was a notable change in weight. So weight gain is also a threat that has to be worried about when you consider trying out a nap-only schedule. So the conclusion from this study that I have here is that they are viable alternatives if you are able to pull it off for a short period of time, at least for short term. And the reason why it most likely won't be able to work is that you have a social life, and it's hard to schedule your life when you have to sleep once every 3 hours and 40 minutes. And you won't be able to exercise, and that is also something that you probably don't want if you want a proactive lifestyle, because exercising has a lot of health benefits, and skipping exercise entirely can lead to some long-term diseases like diabetes because of sedentary lifestyle, and you will probably have to go through intense sleep deprivation for your REM sleep, and so to be able to repartition into the Uberman naps, which is also a very hard process to do. A lot of people fail within a couple of days because they don't have the necessary equipment and settings to be able to pull them off.
I have one question, if
Okay.
that's possible. You said that they found out there's still like the growth hormone after each nap.
Yeah, I mean, it was not that clear. Again, I only extracted the information from the abstract section
Yeah,
itself,
of
which I thought
course.
that is very interesting thing to share, because the secretion thing here might refer to some kind of other hormone regulation mechanism, and not just the growth hormone thing. Yeah, so I probably need to correct myself there. It's probably some other thing that is not specifically mentioned, or just generic hormone, whatever that is. But it's not. It's
But
not.
did
Yeah,
they
it's not. It's not the same thing as monophasic sleep anymore. Now that the schedule is Uberman itself.
say that the amount is lower or higher or the same like the normal growth hormone?
The growth hormone was suppressed entirely, so that means that there's none of that. But for the hormonal regulation, it appears to be the same.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so I mean, whatever that is, probably poorly done on my part, but I still have one more counter argument for Supermemo itself. So the last one, the counter argument 6, is the flexibility of polyphasic sleep and phase shifts. We have talked about earlier about what phase shift actually means, and if you just joined recently, it means that you're trying to move your sleep hours either forward or backward. Forward means that you're sleeping later each night, and backward means that you're sleeping earlier some days. So we have the advanced phase sleep disorder and also delayed phase sleep disorder as well. So what we can interpret from the endocrine and cognitive effects of the Uberman schedule and Claudio Stampi's Why We Nap book, it can be inferred that nap-only schedules like Uberman and probably Demaxion too. Demaxion is a schedule that has 4 30-minute naps, if you don't know. They probably have limited flexibility because sleepers had to quit because of social time limitations. So if you are engaged in a nap-only lifestyle, then you somehow have to be able to arrange your naps around your waking hours and make sure that you get enough rest. And as part of anecdotal evidence, Purosik herself, the inventor, was only able to move the Uberman naps now around for about 5 minutes, and she felt very tired until the nap was taken. So it probably means to say that schedules like Uberman and Demaxion have very limited flexibility, and that you don't really have the ability to move your sleeps around that consistently, because otherwise it confuses the body. The next thing is that the flexible nap-only lifestyles are possible. I'm trying to hint at the Sparmeyer schedule, sleep polyphasically as much as you like, and it mostly due to the needs for that lifestyle. So the only possible way that I think that schedule would work for you is if you are in an environment where you have to sleep like that, and there is no other way for you to sustain a normal sleep schedule. So over time, you might be able to adapt to that thing, but how it affects your health long term, that is still unknown at this point. And it is still better to err on the side of potential risk in the future, so that you know what you're trying to do with your body. So you should consider your lifestyle first. The next point is that the nap-only schedules also have the downsides of waking with sleep inertia and reduced sleep efficiency, as claimed by Claudio Stampi. So sleep inertia is a very interesting phenomenon, because for adapted sleep schedules, you don't get sleep inertia upon waking up. You wake up as though you are still sleeping monophasically. So you are very familiar with the pattern at this point, and you feel really comfortable getting out of bed, and you shouldn't really have any trouble or any desire to sleep in to extend the sleep itself, except if you are sick or something. However, sleep inertia is something that is also observed in long-term Uberman adaptation as well. For example, in the community, we have a guy called Don't Panic. He is able to stay on Uberman for 2 years straight, and he didn't really oversleep, but most notably, he was able to pull off the schedule because he had lower sleep requirement than the majority of people. He slept like 5 hours per night monophasically, so that's why it was possible for him to try out that Uberman schedule, and he stayed on it for 2 years. But even if he got to that point, he remarked that he didn't really get any gains from exercise, which was the point earlier. And he also said that naps are sometimes very hard to wake from, and they have inertia. So what that tells me is that it probably is kind of skeptical to truly adapt to a polyphasic sleep pattern, because sleep inertia is something that is present probably a lot more often than other schedules with a core sleep. So that is something that you need to keep in mind as well, that even if you probably have passed the adaptation process, you still wake up with sleep inertia. How that works, I don't really know, and there hasn't really any full explanation as to why that happens and what can be done to stop it. Aside from the fact that you have a probably very slow sleep requirement to pull it off. The next point is that polyphasic schedules with at least one sizable core sleep in the case that it has like 4.5 hour core sleep minimum have more flexibility in scheduling, especially after you're adapted. This has been demonstrated in the community among adapted sleepers, that they are able to move the naps or the core around slightly a little bit. Schedules like 7 mile sleep every night as much as you like, has a flexibility mechanisms inserted into it, and that's why it's able to work. If you're adapted, you have a normal core sleep like 4 and 5 hours or 6 hours depending on what you pick, and then you have several naps in the day, or like the everyman style, but you just are able to make it flexible and work around your schedule. So it's something pretty good. And the added benefit on top of that is that you still retain the extra hours every day that you have, that a normal monophasic schedule cannot afford that. And the last point is about the phase shift itself. Supermemo would say that we can shift our sleep up to 3 hours, and the human body can be entrained that way. So suggesting that 26 or 27 hour circadian rhythm is not something abnormal. But the counter argument here is that phase shifts still happen because of different interrupting events like social stuff and evening time with the family, or whatever the reason is that you have to delay your sleep at night for some amount of time. So in adapted polyphasic sleep, the whole schedule is just moved forward probably, or just the core sleep itself and some of the sleep are kept at the same hours. So if you happen to move your sleep forward into the night, then it becomes a more than 24 hour circadian rhythm, which is pretty obvious. But the next day, when there are no other interrupting stuff, then your sleep is back to normal. So it's back to 24, or maybe slightly a little bit even earlier. How adapted polyphasic sleepers adopt the strategy to keep a stabilized circadian rhythm. You probably need to ask them about how they manage their schedule and are able to stay on for long. And like I said before, Alice Orr is such a good example that you should ask about how she was able to adapt to different situations and maintain the schedule itself. It's a very sturdy one.
Excuse me, I wanted to ask about this 3 hour shift that you're talking about. Is Supermemo talking about like changing the sleep architecture of a whole 3 hours per day, or is he talking about shifting the circadian rhythm by 3 hours per day? Because I have issues with both of those options. The first one is that if he is talking about actually changing the sleep architecture by several hours, that has been shown by other pieces of research that it's not possible. The circadian rhythm is very stable, but it can sometimes be, the architecture can be changed by a few minutes, like maybe half an hour. And with shifting the circadian rhythm, that's also not possible. That has been shown by several pieces of research that you can only shift it for around an hour each day maximally. It's why people have, jet lag for several days after they return from a trip. They don't just, shift in a single day, a whole 3 hours. Around 1 hour is max in that way. So which one is he referring to?
To be more specific, he actually refers to the first one. He said that a human circadian can be entrained with up to 3 hours of phase shift. So that means that it's up to 3 hours, and it's not 3 hours because he did say in the 2005 version that it is very hard to shift your sleep more than 1 hour each day. Well, obviously, because if you are a 24-hour sleeper, then you wouldn't be able to sleep something so out of place. Like if you are 24-hour sleeper, then you use 24 hours. You use your system. You don't turn it into something else. What he means is that by trying to do free running sleep, then by using the phase shift paradigm, that means that the sleep is actually completely ignored, environmental cues or surroundings or whatever. And it is not uncommon because people who are under such environment, especially low light setting, will develop a free running sleep itself, and it's like not even 24 hours anymore.
Sure, but you have other side neighbors for that. Blind people are very susceptible to the whole free running sleep thing, but they can instead use exercising or food to regulate their circadian rhythm. But still, with the phase shift, I'm pretty sure that refers to shifting the circadian rhythm as a whole. That's what people refer to when they say phase shift. Or do you have some evidence to show that that isn't the case?
I think I do. Let's see. In the phase response curve article, it says that with all the factors that regulate the amount of sleep that one can get each day, it means that if you try to time your circadian, especially with a light exposure or something, that means that you can actually free run your sleep in a sense that you are constrained to 24 hours. So basically, it suggests that if you're a 24-hour person, then you probably can sleep without alarm or whatever that is, and you ignore all the artificial lighting. But what I'm saying is that is largely impossible to pull off, because especially in today's society, you have blue lights everywhere. Like how are you gonna avoid a blue light entirely if you are trying to free run your sleep? You're just delaying your sleep from day to day. I mean you're just getting bad sleep in general, and then what happens if you try to schedule your sleep about the conventional work that you have, like 9 to 5 and stuff like that, and school? There's also a direct, some kind of indirect correlation between irregular sleep pattern, largely about random sleep schedules, like free running, that can result in poor academic performance as well.
Sure, but to me that you're talking about like not a strict restriction. You're talking about more like a social restriction here, that people aren't able to sleep in a free running pattern because. Not because they're not physically able to, but because society places some norms that they aren't allowed to break. But under specific circumstances, they could still be able to break them, and that's fine. I'm not trying to dispute that right now, but I'm still interested in this phase shift, because I can't believe that any credible researcher would say that you're able to alter your circadian rhythm's architecture to support a 27-hour rhythm, like a 27-hour day-night cycle. I can't believe that anyone is saying that, and you're really sure that he's talking about that when he's talking about phase shift.
Yeah, I am pretty sure. From the phase response curve paper, it did mention that the phase shift can be done with up to 3 hours, but whether you should be able to, whether you should in the first place try 27-hour circadian rhythm is largely discouraged. Like you're not supposed to try to pull it off if you're just a normal healthy person. Like the exposure to blue light is the biggest factor, as that article said. If you're trying to get yourself exposed to blue light or whatever, then your sleep is just gonna get delayed. You're effectively making yourself suffer from delayed sleep phase syndrome, and that happens in a lot of teenagers in today's society too. Like teens get poor sleep quality, and then they are sleep deprived at school, like with electronics before bedtime, and then like blue lights and stuff like that. We've seen.
Well, actually, with teens, there's a natural shift in the circadian rhythm. When you're a teenager, your circadian peaks will automatically move to later, and school is an issue because they don't accommodate that. They don't take it into account. They force people to wake up early, even though their circadian rhythm has shifted, and they have a harder time to go to sleep early, and they also get poorer quality sleep earlier. So that's an issue for sure.
Yep. So that's why you develop a circadian rhythm disorder that way, because when you're trying to sleep earlier, then it just doesn't stick, because your body is telling you this is a sleep time and not earlier. So you will have trouble, you will have insomnia if you try to sleep earlier and stuff like that, and it's just all over the place. So the phase shift thing is that if you're trying to do it physically, then you're just risking that your sleep is getting delayed into a later time of the day. I mean, your circadian rhythm might still be 24 hours, but then you're just delaying it into the later part in the night, and then to get enough sleep, then you probably have to extend it to late morning, and that's why it sucks. So that's why using phase shift against polyphasic sleep is only something that works if you consider that people don't do dark period. Is what I'm trying to get at. Like having a dark period means that that you're not delaying your sleep. Like you're telling blue lights, like, you're done. I'm not using you anymore. And then this is a time that the body needs to rest. And that is when, by avoiding light, that is a way to stabilize the circadian rhythm, as we have already known. And a consistency of sleep times every day, I mean, always good. It's always good to be consistent. Like you are totally in control of your sleep, and whether it is 24 hours or whatever sleep that you're trying to do, but definitely not free running, as you sleep, as you risk crashing into different types of activities in the day. And there was also a question that that Supermemo answered, like, what happens if appointments get in the way of free running sleep? And the only answer it can give, as I expected, is to schedule the appointments or make life easier for you in some way. Like, no, like if there are important commitments that I have to do, I can't force the world to revolve around my sleep. I have to adapt to the environment to be able to survive, and that explains why free running sleep is not desirable, and it's only a unicorn schedule that 24-hour people should not in any way try to pull it off. Okay, so the next section is about Supermemo's comic relief materials. As you can see in the 2005 version, the author included a lot of adaptation logs that people fail, but mostly from Uberman and E3. I mean, it's hilarious to read anyway. And he does it without he does it with a sense of provoking tone as to why polyphasic sleeping doesn't work, without knowing that what he's only targeting are only 2 schedules out of what we have, like 17 right now. So it's totally different. And he did say that he had about 10% conversion rate from people who said that he saved them time before they actually tried polyphasic sleeping. But if he determined that 10% conversion rate was a success, then, well, okay, man. You did a good job. It's only 10%, and look at what we have now, like 4,000 people in here. So how does that conversion go for you? And it only goes to show that the author has very rudimentary knowledge with a non-expert quasi research in the background when he talks about polyphasic sleeping, like something that he knows very well. However, what I want to say here is that the adaptation success and failures are based on like a whole lot of factors. I'm not going to give you the full list, so here are just some of them, like the timing of sleep, sleep duration. Like, for example, if you're trying to do Uberman but with all 45-minute naps and 40-minute naps, for example, it theoretically might work better than 20 minutes. Because you're technically getting more sleep, but try waking up from a 45-minute nap, and then you'll probably feel different. It's not that great of a wake because you're mid-cycle into it. It also depends on sleep hygiene. So if you're able to maintain your sleep schedule daily, consistently to the best of your ability. Sleep chronotype. I did this mention earlier, but it is also something important enough to repeat. Because it depends on your chronotype. It depends on if you are an evening or like a morning person. So pick the schedule accordingly. There are a lot of schedules that help with different types of chronotypes. Statistically speaking, it is possible to adapt to something that is not your chronotype, but it could make the adaptation more difficult. The ability to fall asleep quickly, again, it's not that hard to understand. Like, people have trouble falling asleep in naps because, if you have never done it before, then it's obviously going to be difficult. And the most important one here is motivation, which is a very big factor in this, because when you're trying to reduce sleep and you're trying to gain more waking hours in the day, what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to spend the waking hours on? If you cannot really answer to that, then that means that you shouldn't really reduce sleep at all. You can do polyphasic sleeping without reducing sleep, but just throwing it out there. Ability to maintain the strictness of the schedule, consistency mentioned, ability to move sleep around to maintain the sleep structure accordingly. Okay, so that is also very important. So after you adapt to a schedule, if you're able to maintain it and avoid different events from affecting the sleep schedule too drastically, like moving it between events, arranging your nap somewhere that fits you, then I mean you're better off with that, because you will end up with it long term if your strategies work out. Age is also an important factor. So Claudio Sampi did note that some did pose a question of why some people are unable to adapt to any polyphasic schedules when they are older than 45. This question is not answered, so I just bring it up. So just because one grows older doesn't mean that it's easier to adapt to a polyphasic schedule, which contradicts what my beliefs are before. Previously, I believe that if you get older, then you should be able to do polyphasic sleeping more easily, because I mean your sleep becomes more fragmented. But that becomes the case when you get very old, but not in the case that you are middle aged, like 40 and 50. If you're healthy, then your sleep should still be normal. It becomes harder to adapt to it, maybe because of the circumstances like work, family responsibility, and stuff like that. So the age parameter is still unclear here. Next is the genetics factor. Okay, so this is also pretty popular. So if you have some kind of mutation like the EC2 gene, then that allows you to sleep much less than usual. Then you probably can pull off a nap-only schedule, or a more extreme one like E3 more easily than normal people. Or if you have narcolepsy, that means that you end up sleeping much more than usual, and you have a very weird napping behavior and a potential messed up circadian rhythm because of napping, because your excessive daytime sleepiness. Your ability to tolerate sleepiness and sleep deprivation is also something very important, because I mean this is some kind of a willpower thing to do, because like your adaptation, you will be tired and you will be probably blurry. Your mind is telling you to get more sleep, but if you just get out of bed and then you go through it, then eventually you will get there. But I mean not everyone is able to pull it off, and adaptation goes on forever to them, maybe because of other factors. I mean, genetics factors, age, or anything else that contributes to the prolonged adaptation despite sticking to a sleep schedule properly and consistently. So, you know, sometimes it's not always going your way. And you'll be lucky if it turns out that you probably can adapt in the end, no matter how long it takes. But, I mean, if you make it within, like, maybe 40 days, then that is already something that you can consider an achievement. And the last thing is also very important, the equipment to overcome adaptation phase. So as we know that people were able to pull off in experiments in the lab setting, because you know they are given the necessary materials to be able to wake up at the designated times, but we are not in labs. So I mean you just have to prepare yourself with the best possible equipment so that you are able to get up, and if you don't, then you screw up. That's why not only schedules are usually done with a human assistance that makes it possibly work in the end in your favor. The odds are that you will be able to wake up and on time and then maintain the schedule for however long that allows. Okay, so the last section that I want to talk about before closing the discussion is that in case Supermemo's fans or the Supermemo writer himself ever gets back to us in the future when we grow large enough, is some possible kinds of responses that I anticipate here. The first one is that I can see them saying, oh, so you just extend your schedules and make it work by getting more sleep. So for example, schedules like E2 extended, like 6 hours 40 minutes, what the hell does that do? It's kind of similar to monophasic, they say, something like that. CEM, right, after all, you all need extra sleep in your schedule because you're sleep deprived, so you have to make it half-assed this way to make it work. And my response is that we have become more realistic than in the past. Like we don't encourage newcomers to try Woman or Dimension right off the bat, because you know that's just unrealistic and that's mental torture. That is literally killing people. That's not what we do. And we don't aim for 6 hours of extra wake time every day, like from Woman to in comparison with 8-hour monophasic. We just try to gain maybe 1 or 2 hours every day, and the numbers pile up quickly if over time we are able to maintain the schedules ourselves and then stay adapted for as long as we can. Then 1 or 2 hours add up each day. After a year, you see a huge number. So I mean, sleep reduction is possible, but it depends on the sleeper and the goals to be able to pull off. And if you're trying to judge us how we sleep, then you don't have that right, because if something works for us, then it works, and you probably should try before you judge. And for your sleep running advocacy, I have to say that, well, I mean, if it works for you, then great, but chances are, I have to say that you probably suffer from some kind of depression, because it has been shown in the research that depression is some kind of factor that contributes to a polyphasic, not just polyphasic sleeping, but the trouble in maintaining the circadian rhythm, so that you have little less control on your schedule than you actually think that you do. And because of that, and your sleep becomes kind of chaotic, and you kind of free running it in a sense that that you're trying to make things work on your own. So I mean, we're also trying to make things work on our own too. So I mean, I don't see how it's different from your own schedule and proposal of what is to be deemed better and what is not. The second claim that they make, this is also something that captures my attention, is that biphasic sleeping isn't polyphasic sleeping, by the way, because it's closer to monophasic. So you're not doing more polyphasic sleep. I can see something that they can definitely say. My response to that is, okay, so I mean, if you look online on the internet, there are 3 different categories that the writers try to show us. So the first category is monophasic, which is pretty straightforward, 1 sleep per day. And even if it's free running sleep, I mean, you're just doing mono, and it's probably random, because more of a random schedule, because you are not sticking to a sleep time each day consistently enough. And the second category is biphasic sleeping, which is 2 sleeps per day, and the final category is polyphasic sleeping. So the reason why they're trying to dumb down polyphasic sleeping to say that it's not work, because they don't include biphasic sleeping, but I see it as a middle ground, and it's more of a quasi polyphasic schedule, in a sense that if you sleep at least twice per day, then you are closer to the polyphasic group, even though you're technically not there yet, because poly usually means like 3 sleeps minimum per day for you to meet that kind of criteria. But I mean, this is just the problems of semantics and try to dictate what actually works and what doesn't. So by ignoring that biphasic sleeping cannot be fully separated from the polyphasic sleep, you can easily say that polyphasic sleeping has much less viability, but in the essence of its core, it's not really. So if you are doing monophasic for most of the days, and sometimes you just add like a nap during the day, like some days you are biphasic, then that means that you are a monophasic sleeper for the most part. You're more in the monophasic category. But if you consistently sleep 2 times per day and more, then I mean, you are a polyphasic sleeper, and it's the old definitions of separations that focus on polyphasic sleeping that make us ignore the other schedules that can work. For example, E3 extended, E2, and stuff like that. More mild schedules that come up recently, and not in the intense era of Uberman and Everyman 3, when they still ran amok in the world. So I mean, you say whatever you want, but if you sleep more than once per day, which is a plural in English, if you actually aware of counting, then I mean, everything more than 1 is closer to many. And if you sleep only once per day, then I mean, then it's your own domain, and you have no business to show that 1 is closer to 2 than if 2 is closer to 3. A plural is a plural. That's my response.
Excuse me, I want to point out that that's, as you said, semantics thing. Nowadays, polyphasic sleep refers to sleeping at least twice per day, so 2 that's sleeping.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, sorry. So I wanted to say that that's, as you said, a semantics thing. Nowadays, polyphasic sleeping is defined as sleeping at least 2 times per day. So even biphasic sleep is polyphasic sleep.
Yeah, I know that, but like if people and non-believers come in here, or Supermemo fans, like for example, come into contact with us and say, No, it's not, because if you look into Claudio Stampi himself, he never said that biphasic is a true polyphasic schedule, because it still has a long call that resembles monophasic sleep, especially if you consider the non-reducing biphasic version, which consists of sleeping two times each day, but you don't reduce sleep yourself. So it's kind of closer to mono. I can see where he's coming from. But the problem is that if it's a consistent thing, and if it is a part of your life, then it's definitely not in the monophasic category anymore. And I mean, the modern definition changes, and I mean, we are just a community that try to make things easier to understand. But I mean, if non-believers say otherwise, then I mean, they have their point, and they can say that we are probably some fakes or some kind of cult who just make up definitions or whatever to suit our narrative or whatever that is. But you have to. But I mean, like, to understand the root of polyphasic sleeping is not the same thing anymore, because we are actively trying to promote what is safer and what is not anymore, because our focus is not on purely polyphasic behaviors in the past, like just napping. Like it's not going to fit in everyone's lifestyle and goals, or as well as concerns about long-term benefits. So that's why we do it this way. And I mean, people out there can totally come in and say that we are not any kinds of scientists or whatever to be able to change what has been established. But I believe that this reasoning will stand, and at least biphasic sleeping is a safer middle ground that way, because I mean, in a sense, if you are a monophasic sleeper and you want to change into biphasic, then you have to go through some kind of adaptation to get to that. And some people can't even do biphasic just because it looks easy and it looks like mono. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a guaranteed win for you. And like, some people can't even nap in the day because once they do fall asleep and their night sleep is messed up. I've known people like that. They say that naps don't work for them. So I mean, we have the right to include it in there and say that it's part of polyphasic sleeping, even though it's kind of in quasi mode. But whatever that is, that's just clearing things up a little bit more, so that people can probably look at polyphasic sleeping with a more positive reception, that it probably works in different ways, and it has different difficulties. It's not just difficulty of 8 and 10 in the past, like only 8 and 10. So the last question, the Supermemo users, or I mean, whatever that is, that will get to us, is probably they can ask questions like, who are you to say polyphasic sleeping works 100%, or are you a sleep scientist? So my response to that is that the reason why I bring up this discussion as the need to speak out, because I am a 5-year polyphasic sleeper myself, and Dr. Wozniak is a 0-day polyphasic sleeper. So obviously I beat him in that aspect. That is just math. It's facts. It's not something that you can turn around. And if you say that the free running sleep works for you, then I'm going to say that polyphasic sleeping works for me, because if you try to relegate my experience, and I don't believe in your free running sleep either. It goes both ways, like I said. And also the other thing that I want to say is that I'm not a sleep scientist, and none of us here are sleep scientists, but I'm also in a science major. So I'm telling you that science majors, I study a lot of math and physics, and my major is chemistry. So of course I do know a little bit of chemistry in the brain. I mean, I don't know. And of course my knowledge is not like a lot like a professor or something like that. But I'm a graduate, so I know a little bit. And I'm not a kid running through a McDonald's store and then talking about sleep like I'm a scientist. No, I'm actually a science major myself. So I have some more of a scientific background to be able to talk about a scientific matter like polyphasic sleeping. And the fact that it is different as Claudio Stampi's interpretation and inference suggests very interesting possibilities about polyphasic sleeping, and what makes it possibly work for some people and what doesn't. So Supermemo fails to differentiate between what possibly works and what doesn't, and focus most of his attacks on the nap-only schedules, which, I mean, I'm a skeptical myself, so I don't see anything wrong with that. But it is wrong that the Supermemo group tries to group everything polyphasic sleeping into just one small basket, and then say that it doesn't work without and did further research. I do understand that at the time polyphasic sleeping doesn't have the current schedules that we have, like dual core schedules, which is still very uncommon, as you see mostly still everyman and uberman, and we have a biphasic and a triphasic, or whatever that is, the harder groups, but still possible to pull off if you are motivated enough. So all I'm going to say is that it's not just limited to what you already know so far, because what you know so far, you can only speculate or theorize that it doesn't work or it works. And to conclude this discussion, I have to say that because Supermemo uses very indirect evidence to suggest that polyphasic sleeping doesn't work, I can use indirect evidence as well from these resources to claim that free running sleep is bad and polyphasic sleeping works. It's not that easy. It's not that difficult to do that otherwise, because it's the same approach that we are making. And lastly, about the reference section that I mentioned a lot of times earlier. So you can see here the first link, the Sleep Foundation link, is about the definition of circadian lows and high, and the second link is the book of Claudio Stampi, which is the main resource that I use to be able to point out what polyphasic sleeping is and how it works as a current knowledge. There are also articles about segmented sleep in pre-industrial era as the third link, the phase response curve, and the processes underlying sleep regulation articles from Supermemo. The effects of light and delay in suppression of melatonin, which explains why we use a dark period to set up a artificial lighting to be able to maintain our sleep from day to day. I mean, there's a reason why doctors say that we probably should sleep at the same time every day. I mean, that is something great to be able to achieve if you really can, because consistency of sleep is something very good. Your body knows that you sleep at this time, at this hour, and it wakes itself up at this hour, and you eventually can do it without an alarm clock at all. Like for example, myself as a biphasic sleeper, I'm not using any alarm clocks anymore, and I naturally wake up from the core sleep and from my naps as well. And the total sleep time is around the same or very consistent range every day, from like around 6 hours 45 minutes to 7 hour range, and it's not more than that because I'm not sleep deprived. And thanks to the dark period setup and artificial lighting, I get enough sleep and I feel very rested. And I don't have sleep deprivation symptoms like mood swings, loss of appetite, weight gain, or whatever. Those things never happen to me. And the next thing is the free running sleep disorder, and you can look at that and see what makes free running sleep a bad idea and why it is the case. The next one is the endocrine and cognitive effects. This is a new study on the Uberman sleep schedule, if you are interested in looking at. And the rest of the links are just about some of the sleep trackers accuracy, like Zio and Olimix, like I mentioned earlier. And there's also free running sleep association with depression for people who have trouble maintaining their sleep. I mean, it's a trademark distinction of people who have depression compared to people who have who don't have those symptoms and who are healthy. So take a look at that as well. And there's also the link about consistency in the sleep schedule and how it helps with circadian rhythm. So those are all the healthy approaches that we should take about sleep ourselves, and not let our sleep become too much of a chaos. And when it spirals out of control, it will be very hard to get back what you had at the beginning. And that's all I had for today for the discussion. And thank you very much for joining me today. And I hope to see you guys next time.